Welcome everyone to day one of the grant writing workshop, Grant Writing for Every Occasion workshop sponsored by WISHREV, the Wyoming State Archives and the Wyoming State Library. My name is Sarah Davis and I am the Wyoming State Archivist and the WISHREV coordinator. I will be moderating the sessions today and tomorrow. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat box and I will ask them to Susan during today's sessions. Today's agenda includes sessions 1 through 3. Session 1, getting started from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. This will be a discussion about the first steps, finding funders, and proposal components. Session 2 will be what's the problem and who are you from 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. And it will discuss beneficiary need and organizational credibility. Session 3 is what will you do about it from 11 to 12. And it will discuss objectives, methods, and evaluation. And finally, we will have an open discussion from 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. where you can ask your questions and share your knowledge. Note that there will be a 30-minute break between each session today, but we will leave the chat open between the sessions so you can talk amongst yourselves. At the end of the 2-day workshop, we will email links to the recordings of the workshop sessions, any additional sources from the workshops, and a link to a survey to help provide us feedback on the event and help us put together future programming. The presenter for today's workshop is Susan Mark. Susan is the outreach librarian at the Wyoming State Library. Susan is one of 2 coordinators for the Wyoming State Library's Federal Library Service and Technology Act grants from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. She has written grants successively for nonprofits, state government agencies, managed grant contracts, and served on the grant review committees and conducted grant writing workshops. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for more advanced topics presented by Susan, and the last session, session 6, will be presented by Dan Stokes, the Director of State Programs at the NHPRC. With that, I will turn it, I forgot to add in the workshop is sponsor. This workshop is a project of the Wyoming State Historical Records Advisory Board, WISHREV, in partnership with the Wyoming State Library. The WISHREV program is administered by the Wyoming State Archives, which is part of the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources. The workshop is supported in part by an award from the WISHREV through funding through the National Historic Publications and Records Commission, National Archives and Records Administration.
Oh.
Now I will turn it over to Susan Mark.
I'm going to ask you a question, and you can pick any word on the scale of, let's call it terrified to superhero. How do you feel about grant writing? And let's have you toss a word in the chat. Okay, we got one excited at least. A lot of novice, a lot of overwhelmed. Yeah. Somebody said scary. We're going to try to make it less scary. So it's actually, okay, well, that helps to know. And we're going to try to take some of the fear out of it. It's a process, but it's no big secret. It's something that you can do. So let's move on. I'm going to start with what seems like a really silly question, which is, what is a grant? And of course, it's free money, right? It's money you don't have to pay back. But as the saying goes, it's free as in kittens, not as in beer. You are going to have a lot of care and feeding going beyond just the work of putting together the proposal itself. When you sign a grant contract, you have some obligations. You need to comply with all the requirements. You need to, as silly as it sounds, actually complete the project or give the money back. You have to keep financial records, close financial records. You have to evaluate project outcomes. You are going to have to do some reporting. And usually you have to provide some cash or in-kind match. They're not going to plop a project down on you start to finish So before you even go for a proposal, ask yourself if you can and if you should. And one of the places you really have to watch this is if you get sort of a notice of a grant opportunity at the last minute, and you have to make sure that it still aligns with what your organization wants to do. You don't want to chase funding. You want to be solid in what you're trying to accomplish, and then go seek the funding that will serve that purpose. On the flip side, a grant can help you do some amazing things. It can help you really give you a boost. It can help you accomplish things that you couldn't do without the outside help. So there are different types of grants. And this is going to be one of the things that as you look at finding funders, you'll want to make sure that they're funding what you're trying to do. What we're probably going to be talking about mostly in this workshop is a project grant, a program grant. These are, somebody put in that they are looking for funds for collection development. And so that would be kind of a project grant. General operations, these are coveted and not common, where somebody will actually give you money to keep the lights on and pay your staff. Capacity building, a grantor might want to give your, how do I put this? They might want to push your canoe out in the water and so you can row from then on. They might want to set you off in a good strategic direction. They might fund a temporary position with the goal that the person in that position is going to then raise the funds to sustain your organization. Capital construction, I have not dealt with these beasts yet, but I see it in my future, which is, any kind of building project. Matching or challenge, where a grantor says, hey, you come up with 1,000, we'll give you 1,000. I was able once on a project I worked on to get a grant really out of the funder's normal grant cycle, because we got a challenge grant and we were able to go with them. We had a relationship with them and say, guess what? If you guys give us $5,000, we can get $5,000 more. And they went for it. So it can be a very powerful thing. They know they're going to double their money. Emergency response. We saw a lot of this during the COVID pandemic, and we're still, seeing that from the ARPA funds, where there's something gone on that's really impacted organizations. A grantor knows that, a government agency knows that, and they put in some money to help people respond to the emergency. Collaborative, this is kind of an interesting concept, a project that you cannot do alone, but you can do it when you band together with another organization or two. So this is, goes a little bit beyond partnership, where really, all the entities are committing, they're all taking on those grant obligations. And then there might be a demonstration or a pilot grant, and we see Institute of Museum and Library Services do this a lot, where they want to try out something. And it's something that if it works where they try it out, they want it replicated. So those are some of the different types of grants, and you'll see different opportunities on those different fronts. So today we're really going to focus on how to write the proposal. And to start off, I have 3 rules. And one is make sense, which is harder than it sounds like. I've seen a lot of grant applications that didn't make sense. Second is follow directions. As we just discussed in types of grants, that means to make sure you are following their guidelines. I mean, literally, if the grantor tells you to type the letter I on a sheet of loose leaf paper with a manual typewriter 10 times and send it in, then you do it. Whatever they say, whatever their instructions are, just do it. And then to communicate with the funder, where you have the opportunity to reach out to them. And not every funder will you have this opportunity. but most you will. And as the project progresses, to do those. So do you all think you can do that? Let me see a yes in the chat. Okay, everybody's saying yes? That was a short grant workshop, wasn't it? Obviously, I'm just kidding. We have a lot more work to do. But I can tell you, having seen it from the grant funder side, having seen grant proposals come in, if you can do those three things, you are ahead of a lot of your competition. So let's move on to how we do this thing. You'll see different variations of this, but these are the elements of a grant proposal we're going to work with today. And I want you to think of not just in terms of what the specific word here is, but in terms of the concepts, in terms of the things that you are trying to communicate to the funder. And the first will be the summary. Sometimes it's called the abstract, the executive summary. And this is going to go very first in your proposal, and you are going to write it last, because you cannot put together a good summary until you have gotten very solid the rest of the pieces of your grant proposal. You will draw on every component of the grant, but you will also say it short and sweet and in a very compelling and punchy way. Right at the beginning, you're generally not going to have more than a page, a half page maybe, to do this. The second is your organizational credibility, or sometimes it's called the introduction. And this is where you are trying to show that you can do the job. When you write a grant, you know, and sometimes it feels, when you know you really need the money, you are not begging, you are not a supplicant. You have the hands to do the work, and they have the money to do the work. And ideally, if you've done your grant research properly, you have found a funder who wants the same change in the world that you do. So you are really, in essence, offering to partner, and the organizational credibility is where you are going to show how you can be a strong partner to put their money to work. The third is the need, or the situation, or the problem. And this is what you want fixed in the world. This is, we will talk a lot about need, because in my mind, the need is the most important piece. Once you get the need right, everything else falls into place. And what I want you to remember is that your organization doesn't need anything. You may think it does. Your organization does not need a thing. The people you serve do. So your goal, or your goals and objectives. Your goal is sort of the overarching, you know, sometimes these are used interchangeably, or they say goals where they want objectives. But the goal is sort of the overarching, we want to improve childhood literacy. We want to combat summer slide. Whereas the objectives are going to be very much tied to the grant period and what you are doing in that project. Your methods, that's the project, that's the plan, that is the nuts and bolts of what you plan to do. Your evaluation, you know, did it work? That's going to go back to your objectives. Did you meet your objectives? If you didn't, what worked, what didn't? Was there anything that interfered? Is this something you want to keep doing? This is something that you need in a strong proposal, and your funders are going to want to see, but it is also for you. Because I don't know about you, but I got into this line of work because I wanted to do good things in the world. And if the things I am doing are not achieving that aim, I want to move on to something else that will work better. Sustainability. Generally, grantors don't want to adopt you forever. Kind of, a lot of times everybody wants to cut the ribbon on the bridge opening, and nobody wants to be there to repaint the bridge every year. So how are you going to continue the work beyond the grant period? Finally, your budget and your justification. Your budget is the numbers, which I'm sure everybody loves, but the justification is essentially, how did you arrive at those numbers? So, and I want you to think about something. You know, a good proposal really begins with a good project. Every one of these components is a component of a good project. Every one of these is something you should have in place before you embark on anything. And so what you're doing with a grant proposal really is just writing that up. And what you do is having them come together to tell a compelling story that somebody is going to want to fund. So you are going to get sick of seeing this slide because it will show up in every session. If you come away with nothing else, I want you to remember this logic of what a grant proposal, what you are trying to do, what that story is you're trying to tell. And the story is that people in your community need something. And you have a plan to fix this. You have a plan to fill that need. And you are the perfect organization to fix this if you could only have the funds and you are asking the grantor to supply those funds. And this is why it is so important to find a funder whose needs align, or whose goals, whose priorities align with yours. So how do you find these elusive funders? They're all over. They're all over. There are lots of different grants available. You have your private foundations, you have your community foundations, corporations, usually a corporation that operates in your area, government agencies, federal, state. I'm not sure that you'll see much from local. They all want and need to give you money. Foundations are required to give out a certain amount of their endowment every year or lose their status. Corporations, they want the public relations aspect. They want to show that they are good corporate citizens. And government, it's budgeted. There is no incentive for anybody to hang on to it. They want to see it go out and do the purposes of what they are trying to accomplish. And I will also tell you that nobody wants this money back. So if you have something that shifts mid-project, generally they will work with you as long as you are achieving the aims you set out to do. So finding these funders, there's a lot of different ways. There are paid databases, and there is a list of a lot of these in the resources folder. The link went out yesterday in the reminder email. It will go out again when we send out the email about the recordings. So there are some paid databases. Some of them are quite expensive, but GrantStation, if you go in through TechSoup, you can often get that for much less. Candid has a funding information network. GuideStar has 990 forms, which if you are with a nonprofit, you're aware that those are the tax return forms. That will tell you who they're funding. So Grantsmanship Center has some resources, and they have an email newsletter, which is very good with grant opportunities. So if you find email newsletters, sign up for those. There are grant-related blogs. Grants.gov is the go-to for federal grants. You'll also find grants on state and federal government sites. And then you also want to look at corporations that serve your area. And when you find a grant opportunity, when you find a funder that looks like it's a good fit, Google is your friend. You want to crawl all over the website, and you want to find their priorities. You want to find their guidelines. You want to make sure that they are a good fit for you, and then prioritize who you think you're most likely to get funds from. It's generally easier to get funds from local and build out, local, state, and then federal. So again, this is all in the resources list. You don't have to remember this off the top of your head. So let's talk about putting your team, both in terms of what roles need to be covered in a grant application, and what, actually, let me go back. Before we do this, do we have any questions, Sarah? Maybe we can take one or two.
Yes, we have one question from Susan Morlock. She asks, what about the Foundation Center resources?
Foundation Center resources. If you go onto the Foundation Center website, there are libraries and locations that have the Foundation Center database. Now, where we are, they're kind of few and far between. You do have to drive a bit, but it's an amazing database. So if you can find, they used to be called cooperating collections. I can't recall what they're called now, but you can find those on the Foundation Center website, which I believe is Candid now. And find one of those locations, call ahead, make sure that if you need to make an appointment, find out what assistance the librarians may be able to give you. But if you can find one of those locations, it is a powerful search tool. You can go there, do your search, print it off, take it back, save it to a thumb drive or whatever, and take it back with you. And that will give you some very good foundation research. So any other, Sarah?
That's all the questions that I'm seeing so far. Katie Bailey, I believe candid.org is the new iteration of the Foundation Center resources. So that also answers. So
I believe it is. When I first learned about it, it was the Foundation Center, and I'm still caught in that mindset. So let's talk about who we need to put together in terms of team roles and partners. So team roles, and let's live in the real world. I know in a lot of organizations, this entire team will be you. I have sat in on some grant writing workshops where they kind of assume you have a big organization and you're going to be plucking people from every department. But I want you to think in terms of these are the tasks that are these are the roles that are going to need to be covered, whether it's just you, whether you realize, hey, I'm really weak on this. Can I pull in a volunteer? Or is there someone else on staff? So you need someone who's a program specialist, who knows the program that you're trying to get funded inside and out. You're going to need somebody to kind of head up the project. Again, might be the same person. You will need an administrator. You will need somebody who not just knows the work to be done, but someone who has the authority to sign off and who is going to make sure all the parts and pieces in terms of financials, in terms of reporting, are taken care of, and really take responsibility for those grant obligations we talked about. You need a number cruncher. You need somebody who's going to have to come up with a budget. You need somebody who's going to have to keep those financials. You need somebody who can really be a storyteller, because I believe, and maybe this is my creative writing background, that you want to tell a story with your grant proposal. This is not just a dry retelling. This is something that you want to draw them in. You need an editor. You need somebody who's going to totally rip apart your proposal when you put it together. You need a relationship builder. You need somebody who's going to reach out to the funder, build that relationship with them, keep in touch with them, let them know how the project is going. Maybe build relationships in the community you're trying to serve. And you're going to need someone to spread the word, a publicist. So, and I've been in the boat of being this entire team. So we know some of those people, some of you will be in that entire team. So we're going to do our first breakout. If you're watching this as a recording, pause the recording, write down your thoughts. And I want you to think in terms of the team roles and what are your strengths and weaknesses, and how could you either develop those skills, find someone to help. So I see we have a few people coming back. Did you have any takeaways, anything you discussed that you'd like to share in the chat? Coming in fast. A lot of things, different organizations, different challenges. You're solo, hard to edit your own work. Size of a library matters. Many libraries with small staff, yeah. Challenging to find applicable grants. Yes, indeed it is. But telling the story, yes, it can be hard. And we will talk a lot more about telling that story. So I'm going to move on. because we want to be cognizant of people's time, and talk about partnerships. And, you know, these are other organizations. And what are some of the things partners might bring? They're definitely a positive when you are putting together a grant proposal, because funders are going to look kindly on it if other people are in it with you. It's going to show you have community support. It's going to show you have a collaborative attitude. So they might be someone who serves the same target population. They might have similar or complementary goals. They might supply some of your in-kind resources, and we'll talk about letters of support later. But if you have an organization that's going to give you some volunteer time, some staff time, when they do their letter of support, be sure to make sure they have that in their letter. They might promote the project. This is something we often do at the State Library because we have very good communications with our library community. And again, they might supply those letters of support. So very much a positive in a grant proposal to have those partnerships. And we are going to try to go out to break rooms again. I'm going to make them a little bigger this time. And I'm going to actually have them for 7 minutes at the very beginning instead of, let's see, options. No, we're going to leave them the same. Okay, yes, you might have partnerships that you already have, not obvious. Who you partner with matters, definitely. It's a good one, Megan. It's like, look at unconventional partnerships. Possible partners for an expansion of their children's library. Who in your community perhaps serves the same, you know, serves children? Yeah. Other organizations, maybe funding or in kind. Any other thoughts before we move on? Oh, that's a good idea, Rose. Local school systems. See, Rebecca had asked about that. I hope you all are following the chat, kind of learning from each other. Okay. All righty. Let's go ahead and move on. Because as we get ready, we're going to need to put our ducks in a row, so to speak. There are some key documents you're going to gather, and there's a lengthier list in the resources folder. But some things that you really want to have on hand before you start. Some of them are things that are common attachments, like key personnel bios and resumes. There's nothing like getting one day before a deadline and finding out that someone hasn't updated their resume in 10 years. Your 501c3 letter, if you're a nonprofit, your Form 990, the tax form for your organization, your operating budgets, current, next year's, your profit and loss, all those financials, balance sheet, audit results if applicable. These are the kind of things that may be required when you submit a grant proposal. There are also a lot of other documents you're going to want to put together and keep a file. Things like prior grant proposals, your strategic plan, all the things that when you go to write a grant, you would like to have on hand. So before you start, a big one is to review what the requirements are, what the guidelines. Are there any prerequisites? For federal grants, you have to get a unique entity identifier and register in sam.gov. Sam.gov can take 20 days. What is their application format? Are you dealing with, they just say, write up a proposal, or is there a very strict online application? I can tell you the federal grant application is a monster, and you really want to crawl all over that to find out what you're doing before you actually submit. What attachments are they going to want? What attachments that could bolster your case they're going to allow? What they fund and don't fund. Don't ask for equipment if they don't fund it. You're wasting everyone's time. What their match requirements are, how much you're going to have to put up, and is it going to have to be cash, or can it go in kind, and what their reporting requirements are. And if their reporting requirements are extremely stringent, that's something that may make you reconsider whether you apply for that grant, because it's one of your obligations, it's something you'll have to do. And if it's inordinately difficult, that's kind of a strike against that particular funder. So then you want to make a connection. As long as they don't say, don't call us, you want to try to pick up the phone, just say, hey, we've got this project. Use their preferred contact method. I've seen them that say, please don't call us, email us. If they offer a pre-application webinar, and often federal agencies do this, go to it. Absolutely go to it. Find out what they're looking for. Sometimes, and I've seen this also a lot of times in federal grants and with the grants for the Wyoming Arts Council, they'll allow you to submit a draft for review if that is offered. And if they offer that feedback, may sound obvious, but absolutely listen to what they have to say. And I'll tell you why this is harder than it sounds, because when you've put together a proposal, you have put so much work into it. And when somebody offers any kind of criticism of it, your first instinct is to defend. They want to help you get to a proposal that's actually going to get funded. So whatever they ask you to address it and just say thank you. And as you do this, think about how you're going to tailor your proposal. The core of your proposal, like your organization description, if you're looking for funding from multiple funders for the same project, is going to be the same, but you might emphasize one thing a little more than the other, depending on their priorities, depending on who you see they fund. You scavenge a lot from prior grant proposals, but every funder gets a new proposal. So with that, we have a few minutes left, and if it goes a little long, that's okay by me. Do we have questions? Sarah has been monitoring the chat, and then you can also raise your hand and she can allow you to unmute yourself.
So the first question was from Melissa Sierra, how to access large entities that may fall outside of service areas, and how to approach and align for grant purposes.
Right. Yeah. And this is where your research comes in handy, especially if you have the opportunity to go to one of those locations to use the Foundation Center database. You should look at their 990s, look at their look at their website, see what they've been funding, if they have an annual report. And the goal is not to so much align yourself, but to make sure you are seeking funding from someone who aligns with what you are trying to do, and that those are their priorities. For people outside your service area, it's going to help if you have some successful projects in the past. It's going to be easier if you start local and build out. You do have to look. Sometimes they say they'll fund everywhere, but they have, one state that's priority. And that's something that as you prioritize funders, you're going to have to realize that if you're outside that service area, they're less likely to fund you. And so maybe you need to look at someone who does not have that geographic preference. So in essence, it boils down to your funder research. And again, pick up the phone and say, hey, we're in this town, we are looking to do this, and we'd like to discuss it. Is this something that you feel aligns with your priorities? And so on and so forth. So it's going to be a combination of your research and your communication with the funder, but also realize it may be more competitive, so you maybe have to be more on your game. So.
Great. Another question we had from Laura Benton is how long do organizations normally give people to write and prepare a grant?
It really depends. It really depends. It depends on whether you've gone out and been proactive looking for these. It depends on whether it's one of those that you're on an email list and you find out the deadline is a month. I worked for the local library foundation, and I guess this organization discovered they needed to give away money at the last minute. And the very last week of December, they called me and said, can you have me a proposal tomorrow? This is where your grant file will come in really handy. You can, in a pinch, pull together something in a hurry. It really depends on their deadlines, and you have to look at their deadlines. If you have reached out to them and made that initial communication, I would not wait too long. And I would have a lot of your ducks in a row before you even make that first outreach to the funder.
There was a question from Megan Irons that generated a lot of talk, but her question was, what are some unconventional partnerships that you could utilize?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'm hoping you got your answers out of the chat, because I'm not thinking of any at the top of my head. You just really have to think outside your own circles. I know in Wyoming, you can do a nonprofit search. So you could look for nonprofits and in the Secretary of State's and see who else is out there in your community, in your state, that might be achieving the same ends, that might bring a different aspect. So you may look, generally, if it's a nonprofit, it's going to have to register as a corporation with the Secretary of State's office. You may be able to go look at that. You may be able to go to GuideStar. A lot of nonprofits have profiles on there, and try to find who's out there in your community. Try to do a geographic search that you might not have thought of.
A few other people suggested like the local 4-H extension, the senior center, and a few other places.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have time for one more question?
Sure.
Okay. Rachel Molly, I'm sorry if I am butchering everybody's names, asked, how long is a typical proposal?
A typical proposal is going to run 5 to 10 pages without the attachments. If you are submitting, if you have one of those foundations, and as I was doing research for this workshop, I came across one that said, just send a proposal. That said, I have dealt with a lot more online applications in the past couple of years than just loosey-goosey send us a proposal. And for that, you're going to have to look at their, whatever their character limits, their word limits are for their proposal. But you're not going to want to go over 5 to 10 pages. You really want to winnow it down. If you have too much excess in there, you're probably hitting things that they don't need to know. You're probably using 10 words where 10 words where 2 will do. So you want to get it down to a manageable, that was about the size of my college term papers. That's about all anyone wants to read. So with that, it is 8:59 a.m.
Yes. So we will go ahead and leave the chat open. It is the same link for all the sessions today for day 1. We will have a different link for tomorrow's sessions. Otherwise, we will see you back for session 2 at 9:30 a.m.